If we look at the flow, this is the very first part. This is the work done really by the planning committee, and then a little bit by the technical, and then the implementation part here really is done by the technical committee. Then the vendors implement the profiles, test at the connect-a-thons, and we'll touch on the connect-a-thons a little more in a little bit. Hopefully they demonstrate the new profiles they're compliant with at AAPM and ASTRO. It makes it into real-world products, and then our goal is that it improves the safety and efficacy in the real world for real patients. Now, this timeline listed out here of up 14 to 18 months, I have to admit this is a little bit of an idealized timeline. We sometimes or often run later than that, and that's simply because we have a limited number of people who are volunteering and available to do the implementation and do the work. Also, one issue is when we come out with a profile, it may take a while before vendors adopt those profiles and implement them. So we may have profiles that are done for a year or two, but yet have to make it into a released product. And we'll talk about what people can do to help with that if they're interested. And these are details of the life cycle from the page before, just the same things I've talked about. And again, sometimes we come up with a use case where we think we'd really like to see a profile with it, but standards don't exist for it, or the pieces of information we need don't really exist. In those cases, we may send a change proposal back to the DICOM committee to say, we need you to put these things in so we have the information we need to implement the profile. And these, of course, are the things I've just mentioned before. We do send it out for public comment, and anybody and everybody is more than welcome, and we would appreciate if they would review and comment, because, again, we want to implement something that is very useful and very applicable to the real clinical world. We do have a weighting process for this. You know, we do base it, of course, on real clinical problems. We try to address what's most critical, but we also have to figure out if we can do it, like I've been saying. And also, what's the likelihood that the vendors are going to implement this? Because it would be a shame to put a lot of work in and put a year and a half worth of work into something where the vendors say we're not interested in implementing this at all. It'd be much better to do something else that we think stands a real chance. I put in bold the sentence on the bottom here: the clinical user is key to driving profile development. And the reason I bolded that is, again, because that is a very important part of it for us. And recently we had a poll for ranking the use cases on the planning committee, and unfortunately the number of people that voted to give us their input wasn't as much as we really would have liked. So we're actually going back out and trying to solicit more input. So I strongly encourage anyone who's interested in giving us input to do that. Please go ahead for what your problems are. We have content profiles and workflow profiles. Content profiles talk about the specific data items, and workflow, again, is, as you would imagine, the order and flow of the information to make sure that things are in their happen at the proper time. An example of something that's been implemented in the blue boxes to the right, what we call those things actors. So for basic planning, which came out in 2007, we envisioned an imager, something called a contour, and these terms normally are pretty self-explanatory. A contour really is something that allows you to draw contours on the images. Not worrying about anything more than that, but just the contours. A geometric planner is like a simulator that allows you to design a plan, but doesn't calculate dose. A dosimetric planner would be the thing that actually calculates the dose, and a dose displayer would be something that let you see the dose. And the RT archive would be the storage of all that information. So each of those things are an actor, and each of those things have a specific role and specific abilities within their profiles. Another profile is multi-modality registration. This is retired. I happen to rip this slide off or borrow this from people who presented this before, but there's multi-modality registration 2 and 3 out already. But just to give you an idea again of the actors, and here we have it explained what they are, but there's a registrator, a registered contour, a registered display, registered dose display, and an archive. And it may sound silly, but a registered displayer is something different than a dose displayer, because one does just the registered images and the other one actually displays the dose. So we tease those differences out, and this is what we have details on how, details on what each of these actors need to do, and this is all tested at a Connect-a-thon. This one is for advanced RT objects. It's a little bit different of it. I should say a little bit different. We have 2 actors, a producer and a consumer, and a producer means you can make a plan with the beam types listed here, and a consumer means you can bring that information in and use that information. So you could be a producer for motorized wedge, or you could be a consumer for motorized wedge, or both a producer and a consumer. So the testing of this means you would have to test these 14 beam types for producers and the 14 beam types for consumers. But we have things specified for each one of these beam types, and I do have examples a little further to give you an idea of the level of detail that we have involved in this. So we have all these profiles. I do caution you that the information on this slide right now that talks about the active profiles and the profiles in development, those numbers will be changing shortly. This is a couple months old. We are going through the process right now of voting on new use cases. So some of these active profiles may change, or profiles in development may change very shortly. But this is basically where we are. And this is through 2016. And if you look at this and you're not familiar with IHE-RO, you may say, well, what do all these letters mean? In the following slides, I do explain these. But this is to give you an idea of all the work that's been going on in IHE-RO since the start, and the color coding tells you where they're at. So you can see there's a whole pile of them. There's some in public comment. There's a few that are retired and no longer in use. There's a couple that are identified and it says no progress, meaning we said we would like to work on these, but when we rank them, they never rank high enough to actually get work done on them. And that's because people find things that are much more important. Something that's come up in the field more recently that takes priority over that. And if you care to know what all these things mean, I do have slides here broken out of what the retired ones are and explain what those are. There's also a link I'll show you where you can go and look for more details on these, but I'm not going to get into all these right now. So all these are completed. We mentioned MMRO 1 being retired because we have these, some of these, there's work going on for these 6. And then these are identified but not being worked on. There's probably going to be a couple more of those soon that are identified but not a high enough priority.